On No Reserve, we wanted to continue our dialogue about museum deaccessioning. We thought perhaps someone who used to be in the museum world would be more willing to say how things really work. So we are joined today by the legendary Rob Storr, artist, curator, academic, critic, but maybe not golfer. I don't think so, Rob. Welcome.
I failed as a caddy once, and that was enough for me.
It's quite ironic that we're talking to you today about museums and selling, since it just came in on the newswire that the Louvre has sold the Mona Lisa for $4.2 billion. What do you think, Rob?
Is that all?
Well, we offered 4.1 and we got shot down, so I'm a little disappointed for my clients.
No, I mean, I think selling off collections is a bad idea, and that example makes it very clear how bad an idea. That is a unique painting. It's not actually a painting that I particularly care for, but it's a unique painting, irreplaceable, and no matter how many billions you can get for it, and I would have pushed for many more if they were going to sell it at all, you can't get anything that will be the equivalent with that money. So why do it? If you have it, you keep it, and if you have it, you also build other parts of your collections around it, which adds to the meaning of this particular painting, and it in turn adds to the meaning of the ones that you acquire. If you're collecting Italian painting of that vintage, having the Mona Lisa is the keystone, but it is certainly not the only thing.
If it went to another museum, would that be a little bit acceptable?
No. In short, no. And that was the argument when the Asher Durand painting was sold by the I forget what public library to Crystal Bridges. The Asher Durand painting belonged where it was. It was given to be where it was. And I know the Waltons, and I know the Walton that did Crystal Bridges, and I don't begrudge it to her at all. It's just that it was her exorbitant amount of money that allowed her to have it, and it belonged in New York.
Okay, and just to phrase again, and selling for operations and quote unquote collection management, that's the new norm that the Museum Association has allowed. Is that okay or not?
No, it is not okay. Again, we have to re-examine the role of trustees. Trustees volunteer, and it is a volunteer thing, to take on responsibility as stewards of a museum. They are not their portfolio managers. They are not people who are doing us a favor by going to parties. They are people with a job. And if they can't afford to be trustees in the way that their predecessors were, the people who gave the collections, who gave the buildings and so on and so forth, then they shouldn't be there. And if they can only give one kind of thing, only give buildings with their names emblazoned all over it, then they shouldn't be there either. A trustee is a full service person in support of the institution and its functions, and they need to be very, very careful about what they do, not only because it's their duty, that's what they're there for, and legally that's the case in most instances, but it's also because they should consider their own legacy. Supposing they make a major gesture and then the next generation of patrons just pulverizes it, how are they going to feel if the things that they give are sold off, if the building that they had their name on is renamed because another bigger donor came along? And that, of course, has happened over and over again with Grace Dudley Hall and others. But, that is really a problem. Trustees, if trustees want to gain eternal credit and fame for doing things, they can't then just bulldoze the contributions of their predecessors.
Where I have a problem at the moment is the money's being used for operations, which means to me salaries, and the people who are entrusted to making the artistic decisions about what to sell are the same people who would be benefiting from it. So that conflict of interest there, either you're leaving the curators out from what to sell, which would be bad, or they can't get any pay increases, which maybe they deserve, yet we're doing it anyways now.
Okay, I think the business of selling to pay salaries is a bad idea also from the get-go. I think if you're talking about maintenance, if you're talking about the care and preservation of the collections, there are some arguments to be made that caring for what you have is equivalent to getting something new. That's a case you could make. But if you're just paying your own salaries by cashing in what is in the vaults, that is totally wrong. And I would also say that directors' salaries have gone steadily up. Many of them are way beyond where they need to be. I think when Dick Ohlenberg stepped down at the Modern, he was making something like $250,000. And when Glenn Lowry came in, almost instantly he was making a multiple of that. And his salary is now around $2 million plus housing plus all kinds of perks. That is unconscionable.
Now, Rob, you were at MoMA for a long time. MoMA sold plenty of art while you were there. Why was that different and how so?
Well, actually, it didn't sell plenty of art, and it sold some, and there was a lot of publicity when it did. I know that it was Glenn Lowry's intention to sell quite a lot of art, and I think he has done so since. But when I was there, no, we did not sell a lot. We sold very few things. And for example, we sold a Kuniyoshi painting for quite a bundle. We saw a George Bellows painting for quite a bundle, and that got a lot of attention. But the Bellows fell outside of the purview of our collection. It wasn't in any respect modern art. And the Kuniyoshi was a trade, as the museums do, or at least as MoMA used to do, where you trade up for something within the same period. And with the proceeds from that sale, we bought a otherwise unobtainable sketch for the Demoiselles d'Avignon, which is one of the gems of the collection. So no, we did not sell a lot. And actually, there was a project that was done for the Museum of Muse show that Kinesty McShine organized, and it was Doug. What was his name in California? Doug Asher, who did a catalog of the works sold from the museum's collection.
Michael Asher?
Michael Asher, yeah. He did a catalog of the works sold from the museum's collection in the format of the catalog that we publish of the works in the collection. And I think when he went digging, he expected to find lots and lots, and he got a very thin volume out of it. And there was very little in it that you would not have understood why it moved on. For example, when Lily Bliss gave her collection to Baer, it was with the understanding that he could, sort of go through it and pull things out to sell to benefit the collection. So he sold minor Degas to buy major Picassos, for example. And those are the largest part of the sales. There weren't so many things like that thereafter. There were a couple of big mistakes. In the 60s, I believe they sold a Kirchner, which they should never have sold. But the truth of the matter is MoMA has not sold a lot, at least not during the time that I was there. And I know that Kiniston and I and Bob Rosenblum and Kirk, who didn't agree on everything by any means, were in agreement that we should not just simply mine the collection for trophies to be sold.
Well, certainly MoMA has a lot of money, and certainly MoMA has a board with a lot of money, but those were always art for art. So as a general structure of trading up, you don't resist sort of improving and culling the collection itself for other artworks, right?
No, but there are rules to that game too. For example, at MoMA, obviously MoMA is not everybody, but it is a good thing to start with. At MoMA, you traded up within the general category that you were selling from. You didn't sell X, which is, early 20th century, to buy Y, which is late 20th century. You didn't sell Picasso to buy Jeff Koons.
Now, this is often also a relationship with the donor and the collector. And I wonder what you think of what the Dallas Museum has done with the works donated by Rushovsky, Hoffman, and who's the Rose family, where it's a living organism where they said to the museum, you may sell and trade at your discretion the works we're giving you. We understand your needs and views may change over time.
Okay, that is a very generous thing to do, and that's what Lily Bliss did for Baer, but I think it can be easily abused, because if a collector says you may do this, it doesn't mean that it's wise to do it in all cases that it might conceivably be done. And I think there again, the basic rule in museums of modern art anyway is to be very audacious and if possible early in acquiring things and after that, very conservative about keeping them, because you never know when something that was the taste of one generation goes out of favor, comes back again. You don't know that. And I think there are multiple examples of artists who were out of favor, or works of art, types of art that were out of favor, that now you can't have for love nor money.
Do you think museums nowadays correlate the artistic value of a work of art to its financial value?
All too many museums do that, and all too many boards are filled with people for whom that is the normal way of doing business. But museums need to educate their patrons that museums are not businesses. They have to be run in a business-like way in order not to go broke. But you cannot think of a collection as a kind of portfolio out of which you'll sell some other things to trade up or sideways, or just to have the fun of trading.
Well, I think you explained it to me once, where you said once the museum has it, they should think of all the artworks as having $0 values. So they are not thinking, well, we paid $10 million for this picture, we better put it up on the wall, and we only paid $10,000 for this picture, so we don't have so much of a duty. Treating them all as if they're worth zero removes all financial value from them once it's in the museum's hands.
That's correct. That's the way they should think about what they put up, and that's the way they should think about the things when they become terribly valuable. They shouldn't say, well, boy, we really made a killing. Let's sell this off, and then we can get a dozen different things with what this one will now buy us.
Or even exhibit it because it's that.
Yeah, no, that should not be. I mean, basically, when something is given to the museum or bought by the museum with other people's money, it should be therefore permanently a part of that museum, except in exceptional cases. Only in exceptional cases. Because if you take it out, then you can't do the kinds of things that museums are really there to do, which is to teach people how to see and think, to teach art history, to teach formal correspondences, to teach, unknown territories. To an audience which only knows the main narratives and so on. And for example, there was a painting by Frida Kahlo's, which there were several actually, a couple of them, in the museum's collection, which I'd be willing to bet were bought because Frida Kahlo was the wife of Diego Rivera, and Baer was very interested in Diego and wanted to make nice with Frida, right? Both were remarkable paintings. The most remarkable was one which is of her in drag, with a text which talks about her broken relationship with Diego. Now, that picture is a beautiful painting in and of itself. But now that we have a whole generation of people who are looking at gender issues differently, it acquires new or at least enhanced meaning for many people, as opposed to the past where only those people who identified as queer would have understood this. Now, that is something that nobody could have anticipated when that work was acquired. But now it is there. It is actually one of the premier works of its time, of its kind.
Hindsight can be 20/20, but when you were in the trenches, were you thinking 50 years out, 500 years out, 5 minutes out? Was it a conscious way of thinking about what to show and what to buy?
Again, you can't predict that way, but I can say, because I've seen a great deal of work, I can say, I think this will hold up under scrutiny and be of interest for a variety of audiences for a sustainable period of time. And Baer's own rule of thumb was that if 1/3 of the work that you buy stands the test of time, then you've done very well. Which means the other things are not inconsequential. They become historical background to the things that seem to be more interesting over the long haul. But you don't buy things that you don't think are going to be of interest to multiple audiences for more than 5 minutes. And I think that's another thing. Playing catch up with the market, playing catch up with the magazine covers is one of the things that's being done now by many museums, and that's just foolishness.
Now, on another note, how do you feel as a professor now? It's a while since you were at the museum. You're an artist. You've been practicing as an artist for a long time. I'm not sure that's the best term, practicing, but how you're not practicing, you got it already?
May not get much for it, but yes, I do. I've always been doing it, and I do it now just for real.
It's like how you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice, practice, practice. But
the performance that you perform is not practice. That's a performance.
That's a performance. But those multiple hats, have you felt a change personally and in your life when you're in less the limelight now, being up in New Haven versus being an artist and at the same time senior curator at MoMA? Have these things changed you, or were you always the same?
I would say that they have changed me. They've made things subtler, more nuanced, and so on. But my basic convictions haven't changed very much, and not because I think they're absolutely incontrovertible. It's just because I think I was pretty right the first time about the things that mattered most. And the more that I watch time pass, the more I'm convinced that my bets were right in this regard. I think, you cannot run with the hares and hunt with the hounds. And so I have chosen basically to mind my own business at my own pace. And I don't see that I've been proven wrong.
Well, I think it's more clear as an artist you're doing that. You've minded others' business when you were curating the Venice Biennale. That's like a very public, that's perhaps the most public thing you ever did, would you say?
Probably the most public thing I ever did, yeah.
Good experience or bad? Or both?
Very difficult experience because anything in Italy is difficult because nothing in Italy is transparent. And because, of course, when you take a very public exhibition on like that, you have 1,000 enemies instantly among all those people that you didn't pick for the show. And then you also have all the people who wish they were the curators. And then you have all the people who are second guessing curators in general and so on. So the point is you have lots and lots of potential critics. A few of them may be relatively disinterested and they may be able to tell you some things that you could have done better. But most of the negative criticism is simply of people who don't do it, but who think that they can quarterback from the sidelines.
But you've always been energized by your critics, and you kind of like that a bit, don't you?
I'm perfectly happy to take them on. They don't like being taken on, though, I can say that.
How are museums performing in this COVID period? Are they reaching out to their audience? Are they finding new ways to connect to them? Is this an opportunity for them? Are they passing, failing?
Again, I don't think you can generalize. Some museums are doing better than others, but I think this is a very difficult time for museums altogether because the function of a museum is actually to introduce the general public to unique things that can be of all kinds. They can be photography, they can be sound, they can be paintings, they can be sculptures. But the whole point is to be there in the presence of the actual work itself and to have that encounter be, relatively speaking, unmediated so that the viewer is able, in fact, to arrive at their own impressions, conclusions, distaste or taste, whatever it is. So if you can't actually be in the building, that is completely sets that aside. My wife's a musician. She can't play concerts, so she can't really do what she does, and her listeners can't do what they do. I think the museums are somewhat better off because you can create safe distancing in a museum and have 40 people in a room rather than 100 or 150, but that's still pushing it. So I would say that there's a limit on what the museums can do. I think that their audio and video outreach programs are some of them quite interesting. I think the fact that a lot of people are tuning in and learning things from museums about art and about art history is all to the good. I think that's to be admired and to be encouraged. But I don't think the museum form is adaptable past a certain point to non-museum attendance.
It occurs to me that this would be an opportunity to show that art was or wasn't essential. And generally now it's talked about in economic terms, what it provides to the local economy, which is a valid argument. I would have liked to have had the feeling that we could have done a better job of showing why art matters and was essential. And I worry that that argument got lost.
Well, if it got lost, it's because somebody lost it on purpose, because it's been there forever, and there's just been too damn much discussion of money in relation to art. I'm not a Puritan. I've spent millions of dollars of museum money on art. I've helped build collections, not private collections, but museum collections outside of New York as well. I am not squeamish about money, but ultimately money isn't very interesting and art is. So why do we always come back to the conversation about the deal that was behind this particular work showing up where it did. Let's talk about the work itself, and let's make that the center of conversation. And I think that there's a level of cynicism involved in this. There's a level of fear too. People don't know what to say if they can't talk about money, so they don't say anything about all the other things that they could talk about, or they don't pass the microphone to the people who can talk about it. So I would say this is a good time for museums to have their curators speak more, a good time to have outsiders, other artists speaking more about the things they go to museums for, and so on. It could still happen. This is going to go on for quite some months. So I would say maybe one thing the museums can do is to convene those occasions and have people talk about why museums are important to them.
So, Rob, as a professor at perhaps the most prestigious school for art in the country at Yale and former dean of that school, how do you balance sort of the elitism of that program with the need for criticism out there around art to maybe reach a broader audience?
Well, first of all, I don't think that Yale is an elitist institution per se. There are a lot of our students that come from very modest backgrounds, and we raise a lot of money to make it possible for them to do so. So I don't think one should simply say that people who come to Yale were to the manner born.
Okay, fair enough.
Number two, I think that, I think art actually is an extraordinarily democratic thing. It is available to anybody who will look. What museums do is make it possible for virtually anybody to look. Of course, now the entrance price is way beyond the means of most people. So that is a problem. $25 entry is too much money. And one of the things that the museum should look at is in subsidizing admissions on more occasions for more people. But be that as it may, the point is that if you are in a place where you have these truly unique works of art of all kinds, and if anybody can come, then you can have a conversation among people of wildly different backgrounds, different interests, different appetites about what they're seeing and about what they wish was there or wish was not there. And that is an inherently democratic situation. So again, I think one of the biggest problems with the discussion of art and money is it's made it seem like the art is for people who have money. And it's also a toy for those people to make more money. I know all the games that are played. I know some of the things that go on better than anybody, I guess you'd have to say, or most anybody. And it's just not that interesting, okay? What is interesting is the work. And I know some of the lead collectors who have lots of money, but they are intently interested in the things they collect for the reasons that they collect them, which is what's in the work. So let's move this conversation off to the thing that is easy to talk about, but also easy to make mistakes about it, and toward this thing that's harder to talk about, which is aesthetic values, social values, forms, etc.
Well, that led to my final question, which is what art are you looking at and thinking about at the moment?
I've just written a lot of things and they're all in the pipeline, so it's hard to say separate from them, but one is I'm looking at my own stuff. I mean, after years and years and years of mostly not doing very much in my studio, I'm beginning to crank up the machinery. So I'll see what happens. That's my first order of business. But in terms of other people's art, I look at a lot of student work, and Yale, by the way, has had, since I've been here, a large contingent of African-American students. And the stuff they're doing is really interesting. And they are, many of them, making careers very early. And that is a pleasure to watch, and they're doing things that are surprising. So I look at that. There's a lot of art by, LGBTQ people, which is also very interesting in terms of the things it teaches you about gender. It teaches about consciousness as it is gendered. Sometimes the work is not so interesting formally, but sometimes the work is very interesting formally. And then there are all the people that get rediscovered from time to time. Senga Ngudi is an artist who's just recently been written about a good deal. She's been around for a long time. She was sort of plowed under, and then she's been resuscitated, and that's a good thing.
So Rob, 2020 has been quite a year in many ways. What has it meant to you?
It's been the hardest year of my life that I can remember, actually, because it seemed for a while as if we were teetering over the precipice. Now we're teetering again on the precipice. I'm a child of 68. I was in France in 68. I grew up in Chicago before that. So civil rights movement, Black Power movement, all these things, anti-war movement. And to watch all of that stuff go into a black hole and be spun round and round and round, and to find people that I thought I could trust become Trumpites, and to see the cynicism that so many other people began to acquire in the poisonous environment that he created, or at least that he confirmed, has been very, very difficult. And keeping my own sense of where to go from here has been a struggle. I will not deny it. I've been very depressed. But you just have to go on. And I look around the things that I live with, and they're made by artists, some of them you and I know, who've been through much harder times. And I've often thought, for example, what would Leon Golub and Nancy Spiro have made of these times? And they were both friends of ours, both of us. I think, what would they be doing now? And I have sometimes asked myself, and what should I be doing in light of the way I answer that question? And I don't think I've done enough, but I've not been in a position to organize in New York. So what I try to do is to, with my students, raise consciousness as much and as far as I can.
And I think it also related to what you said before, of this being a year that you spent more time in the studio as a way of coping with what was outside the studio.
And I published a book on Philip Guston, my second, that just came out. And there's a passage in there where he's around the 60s sometimes, and he'd been making abstract paintings for 20 years by that time, or almost. And then he said to himself, what am I doing in my studio adjusting a red to a blue? Right? And that was the point at which he began to make figurative art again. And I actually am still adjusting reds to blues or grays to grays, and I find it's okay. And I think of Ed Reinhardt, who painted abstract paintings his entire life. I think of many people whose work does not reflect the times directly, and I'm okay with that. I think Bob Ryman, who I admire enormously, never painted a topical picture. But I think it's important that he did it anyway. He painted anyway, and he stayed true to his own vision. And I think that alone is reason for hope, reason for respect. And I think younger people may not choose to do that now because they're living in a roller coaster time. Those of us who have been sort of the whole journey once before will find more than solace in just sticking to the things that we care about most. And there's a wonderful phrase by Ezra Pound, who was a son of a bitch, but he was a great poet. And he said, what thou lovest well remains, the rest is dross. And I think that is true.
I would be remiss, since you brought up Guston, we talked about museums and ethics, if I didn't come back with the postponement of the Guston show and your thoughts on that.
My thought is it's an utter and total institutional failure by the National Gallery, by the director of the National Gallery, by the other directors that went along with it. I think the curators are of various turns of mind, but I know several of them personally, and I know some of them anyway put up a very strong fight against this. I would single out Mark Godfrey in particular, who wrote a letter that got him suspended from the tape because he spoke the truth, which was that he defended the show as it had been originally conceived against the fears of the director of the National Gallery, who was completely out of her element and who made a precipitous decision for fear of some kind of Washington backlash. It was cowardly, and it will have consequences. The good news is that that show is back on the schedule, and I hope when it's done, will be done pretty much the way it was done the first time. That it will not become just an educational occasion, but it'll be actually an exhibition of art. And the important thing about Guston is, Guston was among the first American artists to say, in essence, that artists are no better than their nemesis, that artists can be Klansmen, that artists can be reactionaries, that artists can be as complicit in the kind of destructive modes of fascism as ardent believers. And that was an unusual thing for anybody to say at that time, but he did. He did it symbolically, obviously. He did it not accusingly, but rather kind of mulling on the ironies of his position as an artist. And it's very valuable to look at that and realize that rather than being a part of the enemy in a categorical way, he was somebody who was over the line, knew it, and said it out loud.
Well, I wish you would say what you really think, Rob, but with that in mind, I think you've nailed that. I appreciate spending the time with you. It's nice to see an old friend, even if it's through all this modern technology, and I look forward to like having a glass of whiskey with you someday again soon. Thank you for joining us, Rob.
Your caddy one of these days.